This room will focus on banking, principles for responsible banking, and we are starting with an exciting session about the future of the Principles for Responsible Banking. It's called the Principles for Responsible Banking 2030, a new paradigm for the banking sector. As you probably know, it's been now 4 years since the principles were launched in 2019, and they were developed by a core group of banks back then in a partnership with the United Nations. Since then, they have grown into the biggest global sustainable banking framework with now more than 300 signatories signing up to the principles that cover more than global half of banking assets. Banks that sign up to the principles take a voluntary commitment to align with the SDGs in the Paris Climate Agreement. And what has been set out very clearly in the frameworks is the key steps how to implement the principles in what we call a journey, an implementation journey. So the first 4 years after signing the principles, banks would analyze the impact that is associated with their core business, then set targets in areas where they have most significant impact and continuously report. So these are the 3 key steps. Now that we move into, for some of the founding banks, the 5th year of implementation, we see a need to define the next stages in the journey. We now will move from target setting to delivering concrete action as well, that then translates into real-world impact. And we also see that now is the time to evaluate what progress has been made as a responsible banking community, and also define what the PRB community's contribution to achieving global sustainability goals by 2030 should be. So for that purpose, we have brought together a new core group of banks in the same spirit as back then that is now working on defining the future of the framework. The core group consists of 27 banks global with CSO level representatives. And it's my pleasure to welcome 3 of the core group representatives to this panel that represent the European membership, broadly speaking. So it's my pleasure, join me in welcoming, first of all, we have Lara de Mesa, who is the global head of responsible banking of Santander. Then we have Kristin Parello-Plesner, who is the head of group sustainability at Danske Bank from Denmark. And last but not least, we have Dimitrios Dimopoulos, the head of ESG at Piraeus Financial Holdings from Greece. So with that, let's get started. 2030 is the time horizon we're looking into in that process. 2030 is also the time horizon for the SDGs. So my first question would be to you, Lara. What is the vision for the banking sector that we are looking into? What has the core group developed so far in the thinking? What should the banks be working towards by 2030?
Thank you so much, Johanna. And well, good afternoon, everyone, and a pleasure to be here. Thank you to UNEP, of course, and to all the colleagues that have made possible that this roundtable is taking place in Madrid these days. No? Great to get together. So, yes, it's 2030, what we are thinking forward, but I would like to start by acknowledging and reflecting on where PRB has brought us until now. No? And as Johanna was remembering, it is 4 years since they were launched. No? And my reflection is that if you would have asked 5 years ago a newly appointed head of sustainability on any bank what the focus of their agenda should be, if he would have made the question what the focus of the sustainability agenda should be and how he could deliver on it, no? He would have obtained quite a range of diverse and dispersed answers. No? And I can tell you this with conviction because that was my case 5 years ago. No? And if a newly appointed head of sustainability of any bank would come to me now and would ask me what the focus of their agenda should be and how to deliver on it, one of my recommendations would be to go to the PRB and look at them and engage on them and follow them. No? And why is that? It's because what PRB has provided to us as a community is first the activities on where we mainly need to deliver impact, and those are four, which are climate action, biodiversity loss, it is economic inclusion, and it is human rights, okay? And it's so important to know the what, no? What is it that you need to focus? Of course, is that a complete answer? We need to acknowledge it is not. Of course, I mean, we are in Europe, and when you just look at the regulatory landscape, that has been something we have also discussed these days. You know how many challenges we have ahead, okay? And there's other things we cannot forget about. But having the clarity of those four areas on which we want to deliver impact is really helpful, no? And then we go to the how, no? And similarly, PRB has provided us of relevant tools, no? PRB give us, of course, on space, give us guidelines in terms of what do we understand by certain elements and how we can progress on them. Give us individual feedback every year that tell us how we are progressing on it, and has pushed us to measure where is that we can have the most of our impact, to set targets, which is also important, no? I think that either you deal with sustainability or with any other field in any organization, we are managers. And as managers, what you need is to manage and to have a goal, no? And being able to measure, set targets, and monitor progress towards them, I think is what allows us to progress, to make a change. And this is what sustainability is about, no? Is, I mean, producing a change on the way we do things, no? And sorry, thinking about 2030, okay? Because this is just to acknowledge where we have moved. So when I think about 2030, and the discussions we've been having in the core group, no? First reflection I would say is, please, let's don't break it. I mean, PRB has worked well, I just mentioned, and let's also remind, Eric was referring to this yesterday, 50% of global banking assets are, as of now, signatories of the PRB. I think that is a success. I mean, in 4 years' time, having such a number of. So I think that we enter into this discussion about revisiting the principles with 40% of banking global assets. Of course, we should aim to come out of this process with even larger and for sure not, shorter range of banking assets, no? So that is first. And second, as Johanna was mentioning, no, I think is target setting that we have says is delivering on those targets that we should aim. And of course, is remain being the reference on, and this framework for banks to give us guidance on what and how we can progress on embedding sustainability.
Thank you, Lara. Dimitrios, maybe a little question on the how when we look at the objectives that Lara just outlined until 2030. Maybe you can tell the audience a bit about how the core group is thinking about delivering on those.
Okay, thank you, Johanna. Well, first of all, I would like to share, my, the honor to being on this new group, this core group that is discussing the 2030 and beyond. I had the opportunity to be on the first core group 4 years ago when we were thinking about these principles, and we're putting them down on paper and trying to bring together banks from all over the world. And as Lara said, 4 years later, we've achieved a lot of things. And I really feel, proud to be part of this team, and I feel even more prouder now that we're looking into the next decade. So how are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, I think it's about time we started delivering real impact in the real world with real people. So that's what we're trying to do. And how are we going to be doing that? Well, first of all, we'll be aligning our portfolios or continue aligning our portfolios, because you never can say that, I've done it. I'm aligned now, so let's do the next thing. We'll always be aligned. Things are changing. And just think of how many things have changed over the last 4 years since we launched the principles. 2 years, economy closed down because of pandemic. A war in the heart of Europe. And all these extreme events that we're seeing at a larger frequency. These were not in our thoughts, 4 years ago. But now, this is a reality. So aligning our portfolios, engaging and supporting our clients is very, very important. Making changes in our business strategy, changing our business model is very, very important. Governance, we still have to, develop internal systems that will promote and support our journey towards sustainability. It's a long journey. It's a journey that's going to be lasting. It's going to last for years. So we need to have that governance there. We need to have the momentum. Keep that momentum. There's 330 so banks now. We have to keep that group working together, and we have to invite a lot more banks so we can make a difference. Working with standard setters and further establishing the PRB as a global framework. That is something that we're looking a lot in the future. And of course, engagement with our regulators. We've heard a lot about the regulators. This is very, very important in Europe as well. So these are the tools and the methodology and the approaches that we'll be using in the years to come so that we can achieve the goals.
You touched upon a couple of things already there, Dimitrios, and of course the ones of you who are familiar with the framework, we always consider the context to be very important, the context being challenges related to sustainable development in the respective country or region that banks need to take into account in their impact analysis as well as target setting process. Now, in the PRB 2030 process itself is also, of course, informed by a number of contextual changes. No surprises to that audience here, but as Dimitrios already described, the landscape of sustainable finance has changed fundamentally in the last 4 years. We have new global agreements that have been established, like the Global Biodiversity Framework that didn't exist 4 years ago. We also see that ambition and action on sustainability is accelerating across the industry, including banking. In various jurisdictions, especially in the European context here, the regulatory requirements have evolved quite a bit, and also the landscape of organizations that's active in sustainable finance has grown substantially. And then last but not least, of course, science is also evolving. In that new global agreements of evolving science, of increasingly ambitious sustainability regulation, how do you see, Kristin, I'm looking at you, how should the PRB framework evolve in that context?
Thanks, and thanks, Lara and Dimitrios, for kicking up the ball. And I think there are a lot of alignment. There is a lot of alignment here already. That is, of course, a super interesting question, whether we could just rely on the regulation that has been developed by the EU and be in compliance. And as I always try to tell my organization internally, that probably the majority of social impact that you could create and also commercialization will not happen just by being compliant and be able to report. So what I think is fundamental and what also has been instrumental for us, for instance, as an example of a bank that was almost a core group bank, I think back in the day, I was about to say, but it's only 4 years ago, but certainly is now, has also been to say that we are going above regulation in what we're doing. And what is instrumental with the principles here is that they are actually giving and providing a good framework of turning ambition into action. One of the things that, and I've been in the sustainability business, if you're allowed to frame it like that, for a long time. And I've seen my fair share of all these initiatives and principles that have developed and all the commitments we're signing up to. And that is all very well, but I would love for all of us to have the ability to really turn all these ambitions and commitments into something more tangible and into action. And I really do think that there is a commitment and ambition fatigue out there, and really a cry for seeing us beginning to deliver on some of these initiatives and on the principles that we've all signed up to. For Danske, for instance, it's already 25 principles, I believe, that we are part of. Just managing that amount in itself and monitoring it is a huge task. I have 5 people just doing that almost. And what is fundamental is that we start working with something that is impact related in that regard. And I think that's the strength of the PRB. One, that it is impact related. Two, that it's overarching also, that it covers the entire financial and the banking sector and brings us together. And underlying that, we have all the other principles, but it really is comprehensive in that way. And I would like to see much more of this, you know, aligning so that we can all drive on the same highway eventually and not go down all kinds of different roads of initiatives, but really have a mainstream highway with some of these major issues that we need to, well, we both have a responsibility, but also a great opportunity to solve for many of them. And that is, again, where the impact is coming into place, because one thing is that we should improve measuring and monitoring and also being transparent about the impacts that we are eventually creating, but also that we are increasingly looking into how does that fit, and you touched upon that, Dimitrios, into our commercialization strategies. And I think there's still something major to be said about that, because, and there was talk about that this morning, when I'm hearing, and I guess we're all at a lot of these conferences where we are discussing the sustainability agenda. But when I'm hearing about the initiatives and the steps we're taking, it's still very early days, and there's a lot of work to do, and it's still somewhat more of fringe initiatives or niche initiatives at the fringes of our banking activities. And how do we really bring it into the core business? That is going to be, in my opinion, one of the huge questions forward 2030 to solve, because that is the only way we actually really can create impact.
Thank you, Kristin. Lara, I saw you nod. What's your opinion? How should the framework evolve until 2030?
Thank you so much. Fully agreeing with what Kristin said, and I would highlight two of her comments. When she mentioned, I do agree on moving from ambition, intention to actions, and also to the need to converge initiatives somehow. I mean, just dispersion doesn't help us to really have a focus on progress, so it's very much needed. So building on that, two additional comments. We have had discussions at the core group somehow on whether, with all the developments of new frameworks, of standards, what was the role to play by PRB on moving forward. And I think we really concluded that the PRB can play this role that Kristin was also referring to, to be this common reference or umbrella where somehow things converge. And we should be thinking about these developments, of course, not as pieces that do challenge anyhow PRB role, but pieces that do reinforce the common goal that we do have and provide us of tools that are also needed. They provide us of common languages, they provide us of the possibility to have more comparable information and more rational information among us. So those are really enablers that are pursuing similar goal as PRB, and we should take it as that, and so keep aiming just for the PRB to remain being that framework that allow us, to have a common understanding, And then second message from my side would be that I think we need to learn from experience. And it's great to have ambition, of course, and to progress, but also we need to realize, and we have learned, how having a role to play, banks, we also are very dependent on others. And this is very important because as it was said yesterday, banks are the man and the woman in the middle. We are the enablers for things to happen, but we really need, real economy to move. And without that, things won't happen, And we need clarity on that, and really being ambitious, being pragmatic also on what is that we can be done. We have had also discussions around, for example, the new framework on biodiversity. Could we be moving similarly to what we have done on climate? On climate also, I would like to highlight how also PRB, I think, help a lot on Net Zero Banking Alliance being set up, and how connected also are those two initiatives. And it's very important that we do have an umbrella, but that we also come on those, particularly on those four main areas that we signaled before, and climate, of course, is one of them. We come with very specific developments that help us progress, And no doubt, Net Zero Banking Alliance is doing a very important role on that, So going back to the biodiversity question, And somehow the reflection that we were sharing is on climate, we already have an understanding that is quite new on what is that we need to be doing, We need to measure finance emissions and to reduce them. And achieving net zero by 2050. And that gives us a clarity on what as managers we need to do. And that allows us to get tractions within organizations, so to move things towards that, which is not easy at all, but I mean, we do have a goal. When it comes to biodiversity, yes, we do have a framework that even talks about goals and targets, but we still are not so certain on what is it that we need to measure, how is it that we need to manage, what does it mean something being nature positive, how we prove for that being the case. So these are some things on how you need to combine ambition with pragmatism and wanting to foster progress and commitment and committing to something while being realistic on what is the role you can play and what other enablers you need to be in place, no?
Thank you, Lara. Sorry, comment?
No, yeah, my comment was just also back to the regulation, that is exactly what I think makes this important, that there has been a push in the EU, of course, regulatory-wise, but we have to be mindful of that we are just a huge complexity of banks going, well, global. And when we're addressing these themes that Lara just mentioned on climate and biodiversity, these are also transversing themes and issues that go way beyond the regulation here. So I think creating that level playing field internationally or globally is a super strength of the principles.
If I can make a comment, I think that one of the biggest values of the principles is that it provides a vision. It provides a vision where we want to be collectively in the next years by 2030 and even beyond. And I think that people that have vision, companies that have a very clear vision, are most successful. We are members, you said, what, 25 principles you're following in your bank? Oh, yeah, whatever, okay. I mean, we're all members of, various initiatives, organizations and all this. You were running around, filling in forms, reporting, disclosing, all that. But we don't know why we're doing all that. Well, the principles come in and say, we're doing it because we want to go there. And when it comes to the regulation issue, one thing I want to clarify here. Regulation tells us what to do. It doesn't tell us how to do it. That's where the principles come in. Principals come in and say, you're going to do it, we're going to do it in a responsible way, we're going to do it in an ethical way, we're going to do it without greenwashing, we're going to do it because we're serious, we believe in it. So that's one thing, and I think that, to finish my comment, I think the principle is more like the North Star, where it has a direction and we know where we're going, but it's also a lighthouse. It tells you what to avoid. Don't go and crash into the rocks. And that is greenwashing and other things that can sort of take you away from your course. So that's why I see the value in principles, and that's why they're very, very important. And that's why I think that banks that are not part of the core group, but are members of PRB, will have to eventually get involved in formulating the final documents, the final decision, the final statement. So I call you now to come and join this very beautiful work that has been going on. Because we have a deadline, isn't it? By when do we want to deliver?
Mid next year. I was going to say yes. So we want to go live mid next year with vision for the banking sector, what the journey should look like. That's a big deliverable. But then also what Dimitrios very colorfully just indicated, what's the value proposition of the PRB moving forward?
And if I may, Johanna, because I fully agree with what Dimitrios just said, and I think, again, going back to European regulation, sometimes we are so much overwhelmed by regulation that it seems like regulation is setting the pace. What is it that we need to do? I mean, cannot be. I mean, we really need to have a vision that goes, beyond regulation, and we have that, understanding, where we want to move forward. And again, just PRB is very much helping us on having such.
Yeah, regulation is rarely a strategy. So it gives a good push from the bottom in creating the fundamentals, perhaps in your organization. It's a huge animal, frankly, and we have also, again, tons of people trying to sort the CSRD and ESRS out right now and how we're going to report. But again, this is not about finding data only in your organization and then reporting it externally. It is more about how do you create a strategy around these themes that we need to solve for, and how do you integrate that within your business and commercialization. And that is where these voluntary principles come into place, in my opinion, because that gives you a narrative or a framework, at least, that you can work with within your organization and adapt to your organization around these themes such as nature, risk, and climate, obviously as the main drivers, but also on human rights and social inclusion.
Thank you all. That is exactly the spirit of the PRB 2030 process. You can tell from the conversations up here that all of these issues have been discussed extensively in the core group being the representatives on behalf of membership. So again, there is the invite to get engaged in the process via your core group representatives, to bring in your opinions as well, because it's a very inclusive process in the end. And whatever we will do, we will go through also membership consultation in the end, to really move along with on behalf of the entire membership. I think we can also move on to the next point, which is now, of course, target setting is a complex endeavor, but we already heard it's actually easy compared to delivering again on the targets. And that is also one of the big things that we're looking into, because of course we are informed by the progress that has happened so far, by the lessons learned that we have collectively had so far, and members have made significant progress in the implementation with regards to understanding impacts associated with portfolios, with regards to target setting in areas of most significant impact, with embedding sustainability in governance structures. But of course now the question is, what next? How does delivery against targets look like? And we know that more work is needed, also at a faster pace, to ensure that the banks are translating the targets into actions that ultimately will lead to real-world impact. So the question is, how can the framework now, in your opinion, guide banks in the further implementation? And the question is very much open to anybody who wants to go first. Kristin.
Well, I'll see if I can kick it off then. I think Lara said something very important just right before, that we have so much, it's such a big group of banks now that have joined the PRB, but let's not break it. So let's really make sure that this is something that is workable, and let's not get ahead of ourselves either. So when we're discussing how can we now, from beginning to measure our portfolios, set targets for climate, I think it's really important to keep the focus on the how, and support the banks in exactly that, and not get ahead of ourselves and set overarching new principles. I think that's a balance that we really want to strike in, also in the core group, or at least that has been core of many of the discussions. But really, again, focus on the methodologies that support us and push us forward, and help us create our transition plans eventually. Again, getting very practical around this, I've utilized it tremendously in my own organization in our own path towards elaborating a climate action plan that we launched this January, and using the methodologies that were provided and the focus. And next, coming up, nature, risk, and biodiversity, where we have worked around target setting and will be launching later in the year. So really using these frameworks to push the organization, but in a way that is tangible and manageable, I would say. And that thing, I think, also is something that we need to share more of in the community, so that we step by step can create those improvements.
If I may add, I think, it's very important now that we stress the urgency of the issues. I mean, we've been hearing over the last 1.5 days, the impacts of climate change throughout the world, the impact that it has on societies and on all the rest. So it is very, very important that as principals, we do put this message of urgency across to all the banks. We don't have the leisure of time to think over and over, or to wait for the perfect data to wake up, to come to us, and then come up with the perfect methodology. We have to work with the tools we have. These tools will be improved over time through practice. So urgency, sharing good practices. We are a community of 320 banks. Hopefully there'll be more of us in the next European Roundtable. This community is a source of great expertise, and if we can exchange that expertise, it can help us. It can help every single bank. It can help us, the people that are in these meetings, that are participating in the various working groups within UNEP, to bring that message back to our own banks, because we have to work on many fields. We have to work as sustainability departments or whatever with all the other departments within the banks, and then we have to work with our clients, and we have to work with other with governments and all the rest. So it's very, very important that we share that expertise. Good practices always is very good. Good guidances, we need that. You mentioned transition plans. That is the next big thing, because we have to provide tools and guidance that banks can produce credible transition plans. We heard in the first session, on the first day, from the chairs of three banks, Spanish big banks too, that we have to invest in the highest emitters. But how are we going to do that? Could that be defeating our purpose? If the big emitters do not have credible transition plans, then it will be very difficult to justify to society that we are continuing funding these emitters. So it's very, very important that we clarify what it is, what transition financing is about, and how we can do it in the right way. Capacity building is, of course, something that we'll have to work on. All these are very, very important, but most importantly is to keep this community strong, to keep that momentum within the PRB signatories and within our banks.
Yes, I do think we go back to the idea, no, how we combine ambition and pragmatism. And when we talk about targets, I think we have learned. We have learned that setting targets is something from which we learn a lot, but it's also quite a complex task. I mean, to set a target, you need to have, baselines, design choices, information about clients and assets. You need to engage with clients so to progress on their delivery. So it's complex. So it's a useful tool, but that may be fit for some purpose when circumstances contribute to that, no? We also need to be aware of what is the current context. We are in a context as of now, new standards have just been launched on which increasing reporting requirements are taking place, and on which greenwashing risk, is out there putting on us a lot of pressure, no? And on the need to deliver. So going back again, I think this is something for which time is of essence, and we need to progress, but we need to build also credibility. So whatever step we make, it needs to be a robust one. It needs to be credible and strong, so to last over time. And I think that lately, what we are talking, aiming to do with sustainability is pushing economic agents to make better decisions by considering environmental and social considerations, no, that they were forgetting about. And if we want them to do so, we need to provide them of credibility in the numbers and in the figures that we are providing to them. And they also need to see what is the business case between the input and the outcome of what they are investing, no? And of course, that can be measured, different ways, no? So target setting as a useful tool, of course, but acknowledge what are the challenges, so to set them and manage them, and consider the context and when they are fit for purpose, and when there are other tools that we could also be using, okay, to further progress.
Thank you all. A couple of other things that I wanted to add that have been discussed or will be discussed in the coming months in the core group. And I'm just calling them out, and if you then can come in. So we will also discuss the whole issue of internal change management. That's a big thing. Client engagement. We will also discuss engagement mechanisms that might be needed, maybe on a regional level with policymakers, with industry associations, and so on. So these are things we also look into. I don't know if somebody of you wants to speak to any of those.
Happy to say something, but no, please.
Yeah, those are. While those are actually issues that I think will occupy each and every one of you, because they are very internally oriented in your organizations, and I always say, if you work with the sustainability agenda, you work on a change agenda internally every single day, and you will have people who are with you, and you will also have a lot of question marks and skepticism. So great if we can support each other. But there, I think in that regard, we can again provide maybe some methodologies to create that support. But you mentioned something I also thought was important that I wanted to pick on, is creating the best practice and these examples and learning from each other in that regard. So I really hope that will also create a room for sharing some of these examples, perhaps also some of the frustrations that are probably coming up now and again in each and every organization. And that is driven both by regulation and strategies and external issues and themes that we need to solve for, is how do we get organized internally? I think that's one thing that most organizations are thinking about now, because the agenda involves everyone throughout, and how do you really manage that? How do you get everyone to play the same tune in your organization in regards to these themes? That's certainly on my mind, at least, and looking at the operating model for creating, well, both in the human resources area, but also in terms of data management, data insights and analytics on the sustainability agenda. It's a whole new animal in a way. So these are also very, very important topic, and sort of launching off for a completely new discipline and methodology in a way.
I'd just like to stress what Lara said about the business case. This is something we should not forget, because we're banks, we make money. That's and you can't be sustainable if you don't make money. That's simple as that. So it's very, very important that we work very closely with our business units, and because they're the people that go out and talk to the clients. They're the ones that sell. They're the ones that know what the market wants and all the rest. So it's very, very important that we work internally with our business units, and also the other enabling units, HR and all that. They're very, very important in capacity building and all the rest. Also, we have to reach out to our CEOs and our boards. It's very, very important that we educate or train our boards. It's something that we see that happening. I see that happening in our bank. I mean, we're arranging next week a training session specifically for the directors. About a year ago, we got a director who's very much experienced in sustainability issues and all the rest. So it's really important that we are in touch, and we keep the top management engaged, because that's where the tone is set. And I think it's really important that we carry on internally and also trying to bring to outside the world, and bring to the people that, like to all the other stakeholders, what we're trying to do. Because it's not only our clients, there's other stakeholders, a lot of them out there, and they have to understand what we're doing, because they turn around and ask banks to do a lot more, probably a lot more than we should be doing. I mean, we take our fair share of responsibility, but we're not responsible for everything that's happening on this planet. So we have to be very, very clear within ourselves and within our stakeholders.
Yeah, two ideas that I would like to pick up on again how the PRB and this community can help us that have been mentioned. One is sustainability being a change management agenda within our organizations, and this imposes a challenge of internal engagement. So how I convince others. And here, of course, I do learn every time I talk to any head of sustainability, and what are the challenges we're facing, what are the things that have helped us and have worked, where are the failures or things that we haven't still sorted out how to convince whoever, no? So I think this is a learning that we need to know, no? I mean, we do need to engage so many functions within our organization, so how to do that, how to be successful on doing so, engaging the business, as Dimitrios was saying, I mean, it's very important, no? So this internal management and need for engagement, and then community of practice. That actually we have had different sessions around that, not just on the, in the context of the PRV, not just the core group, and they have, I think, proven to be very useful. No, and the second is about banks having a role that is an enabler. No, and this again put us in the middle again. No, so we are in between forces that are internal or external. And going back to the PRV, yes, I do think that should be engaging with others, because if we are an enabler, it's not so much what we agree among us, which is very important. And of course, it's not so much being relevant that we do have a vision as a sector of what is the role we want to play and what we want to provide. No, it's how we do engage with others, because if we are an enabler, we need to talk to the others. No, and on what is that. An enabler, of course, is talking about our clients and is talking about, yes, the regulators, supervisors, no, and how we need them to help us helping others. And playing a role on that.
Just a concluding remark to your comment, actually, is we have been called out, especially in the European jurisdiction, but I think also clearly in other jurisdictions, that we have a systemic role in creating, in the transition, in moving our societies forward toward a more sustainable future. And again, giving a practical example, when we were looking at our baseline, our emissions, it was, when we launched them, it was misunderstood by the press as if those were our emissions. So I had a long journey explaining, look, these are the emissions, our baseline, these are the emissions of the Nordic societies. If you want to bring those down, we really have to work with the emitters and transition them. Otherwise, we're not going to succeed with anything, and it has to be the high emitters as again, because if we're not succeeding in transitioning them, nothing will happen eventually. And I think that is where this gets down to business, client-oriented, through advisory, etc. Therefore, there's two things that get me a little bit into the corner, or a little bit on my heels, is when people are talking about ambition and ambassadors, for example. And nothing wrong with having an ambition and also not ambassadors, but this is so business oriented. This is much more a discussion now about strategy, a systemic role, and it has to come from the top, as you also pointed toward, Dimitrios, that this is your ELT that has to fundamentally address this. It's not bubbling up grassroots-wise in your organization. Unfortunately, also not just from the business units. There has to be a good collaboration between the business units and the people that are client-facing, and the clear tone and voice from the top in order to make this succeed.
Thanks, also very clear. We will, banks will continue to work internally as well as delivering then externally on targets set. Of course, we'd have a lot more questions, but we also want to give a bit of room to the audience to ask some questions before, in the end, we would also cover a bit the next steps, the process, as well as some concluding remarks. So are there any comments or questions from anybody in the room? Can I see some appetite or not? If you can, I'll give
got a few over here.
Okay. So if you can also introduce yourself and who the question would go to. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm Fabiola Baraldi from Italy, from Banca, and I would like to ask you which kind of tools have you already introduced to assess the impact? For example, I'm trying to interact with the impact assessment tool of UNEP, and I would be really pleased to have your comments about that. Thank you very much.
You want me? Yeah. Are we wrapping up?
I think let's get another question and then we can, yes.
Hi, thanks very much for the panel. Mael Lagadek from Sustainalytics. Quick question on biodiversity and nature. You mentioned earlier that it's time to work on targets and define objectives in what it is to be a nature positive or nature contributing bank. When looking at the TNFD LEAP framework, target settings comes at the end. So what steps are you taking prior to measuring progress in setting targets, what steps are you taking to make sure that you, in a way, stop financing certain type of activities which in nature are bad for nature and finance the right activities?
Okay, so first question is very much internally focused. So what have you done to analyze your impact? What methodology have you used so far? Anybody?
Yeah, happy to share. Thank you for the question. Yes, we are using UNEP impact assessment tool as of now. So to progress on the approach on materiality that the CSRD is asking to us. Okay? And this is proving to be useful, I have to say. Actually, I want to thank UNEP because they have also helped us somehow check in or give us comments to the mapping on how we have mapped the ESRS topics with UNEP impact tool topics somehow, so that we can really, apply this tool for the purpose that the CSRD expect on us. No? And I think it's great, of course, when you start using a tool, you assume that improvements will need to be made over time. But I have to tell you that just being able to pull together opportunities and risks, for this we have also used additional tools such as SASB and others, okay? But just pulling together everything and help us approaching the materiality assessment in a more quantitative way that really, is quite informative and helps you first think and challenge your own views about where is it that you can be, providing the biggest impact. And of course, informing your strategy and your decisions about where you should be focusing. No? So going back to Kristin before, it's not just about what reporting requirements will I need to fulfill, but how do I need to revisit my strategy on the basics of the findings of applying such a tool. No? I could comment on biodiversity, but I'm sure that Dimitrios and others will have. No.
I'm really enjoying it.
We have just started. To do assessments on biodiversity, understanding dependencies and impacts. But as I tried to say before, I really think we are on an early stage, and I do agree with Dimitrios, time is of essence and we need to run, but still we need, to much more progress on the understanding on biodiversity and what to measure and how to do it before thinking about setting targets. That I would say is our current mood on it.
Well, I just wanted to add that, UNEP has a working group on target setting, but before that, it has set up a tool like the Encore, which helps, banks understand their dependencies. So there's a lot of other, let's say, material there that helps banks understand how they should be dealing with this issue of biodiversity, and then eventually setting targets, which is, quite a challenging effort there.
And maybe just to add to that point, there was a nature panel yesterday as well. As Dimitrios mentioned, we're working on nature target setting guidance, but we also have what is called a progressive approach to target setting, because ultimately one should be setting target on the impact level, but for biodiversity nature, we're not there yet. So progressive means setting financial targets, client engagement targets as an interim step on the pathway to impact is what is also needed. And of course, the whole analysis and so on, that's always the starting point for any target setting process. And the target setting will also be aligned with the TNFD steps. With that, we have a couple of minutes left. I'd give the floor back to you with some concluding remarks, maybe also to the other signatories and the outlook for the PB 2030 process.
I just want to make a remark. After following this discussion, which was really interesting, a lot of these things that we discussed this afternoon were discussed 4 years ago when we were setting up the principles. The difference is that at that time, they were more theoretical. Now, 4 years later, I've seen, and I'm really happy for that we are speaking from experience. We know what we want more. We have become wiser, if I could say so. And that's very good. That's a very good sign. And all that has happened over just 4 years. So I think what we are doing here with the principles and looking at the 2030 vision, where we want to go is very, very important. And I call any of the banks that are here, either as members of PRB or if they're not, join the PRB principles and be part of this conversation. It's going to help your work at the end of the day.
I can perhaps follow up then and say, let's get very pragmatic. I think that's what I'm hearing you say as well. And now get the experience. We need to move at a faster pace. So that also requires that not everything is perfect. But we have to build on the experience we have and then develop from there and be very strategic about it. I think in that regard, when discussions get difficult, we can utilize regulation as a catalyst for some things, but we really need to build upon that and go beyond that if we want to create the needed change and also want to create something that is meaningful for our organizations.
Yeah, I would just say that as I acknowledged before, I miss not having the PRB 5 years ago. I think it is a great framework to have, and making it stronger depends on us. And I think that we will all benefit from keeping PRB as a framework that gives us a vision and that helps us guide in our efforts, and that we should all work on it. No? So as Johanna has said, I mean, we are working, some of us, on this core group, so to bring a proposal to you. But of course, as members of PRB, you will all have a say during the process. And I would just encourage you, of course, to share your views and to your comments on how we should evolve them. Okay, so they keep playing the role they have been playing for the last 4 years.
Fantastic. Join me in thanking the panelists for the exciting insights. Thank you very much.